Definitely not sleeping in on Sundays. Welcome to home number 4 for the year. We just moved into an apartment in Oyonnax. It's a city I had never been to, but so far it's going really well. It seems like a nice city. It's about 60 kilometers from Bourg-en-Bresse, about 100 kilometers from Geneva, and is right to the foot of the Jura Mountains. And it's our Airbnb home for the next month. It was a pretty last minute find. We were about 2 days away from being homeless, but it all worked out. It's the second day in the city, and so far it has everything we need. It's got a pool for Sarah, nice training roads, and we have a place to sleep. Definitely a win. What it does mean though is our stint at altitude is done, and now I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Now that I'm back down at a more reasonable altitude and not clinging to the side of a Swiss mountain, I thought I'd just share my experience of what was my first real high altitude training camp. Altitude training comes in 3 forms. There's live high, train high, there's live high, train low, and then there's live low and train high. They're pretty self-explanatory, but the most popular one is the live high, train low version. If you look at all the biggest pro cycling teams, they're all using this live high, train low version of altitude training. The majority of them go to the island of Tenerife, and they're sleeping up at somewhere around 2,000 odd meters, and they're doing most of their training much lower on the mountain, below 1,000 meters. This version of altitude training lets you spend a large amount of time up high, getting all the signals to cause altitude adaptation, but you're training low enough that it's not impacting the quality of your training. So you can really get your hard efforts in without those being compromised by a lack of oxygen. But then when you go up high, you're spending a large portion of the day with low oxygen availability, causing the stimulation that you need. The other 2 versions of altitude training also work, but they all have their pros and cons, but in general, the live high, train low one seems to be the most popular. While doing my research for this trip, looking up sort of what to expect and what adaptations would occur, the one thing that came forward over and over again was that the adaptations are really individual. What one person experiences at 1,000 meters, someone else might experience at 1,600 meters, etc, etc. So knowing what altitude to go to for yourself is pretty much just trial and error. As with any training camp, high altitude or low, the quality of your training is generally pretty high. With not a lot going on, you're forced to really eat, sleep and ride. And I think that's even amplified by sort of sleeping on the top of a mountain, because there really is pretty much nothing going on. Also, being based in mountainous terrain increases the quality of your training. Being forced to do a lot of climbing and being forced to go up a 15k climb at 8% to end most of your rides really makes for solid quality training. After 20 days up there, it's really difficult to quantify the results. I don't suddenly feel like I have an extra 50 watts available or anything like that. I mean, I do feel pretty good on the bike, but I felt good up there as well. So to actually put a number on the training camp, that's really difficult to do. The 2 things that did change that I noticed were hydration and nutrition. For me, I was just constantly thirsty up there. I was drinking way more water than I normally do, and I was just still thirsty like all the time. The second thing was that I was craving carbohydrate like crazy. I just wanted it stacked on at every meal. I think the reason for that is kind of twofold. Firstly, less oxygen means the fuel you're burning is sort of more carbohydrate based than it is fat. And also because you're climbing so much, you're kind of forced to increase the intensity of your training just to get over these mountains. So instead of doing 220 watts for an entire ride, I was climbing at sort of 250 to 260 before descending down the other side. And I think that changed the composition of the fuel that I was using. Spending more time slightly above my traditional endurance pace, I also think had a positive effect. Coming back down here, I'm feeling really strong, just cruising around, and the wattage that I normally use for warm-ups and cool-downs or sort of recovery and endurance rides has definitely increased. That's partly probably due to the high altitude, but also just to all the extended climbs that I was doing at slightly higher wattages. My overall experience was definitely a positive one. I really enjoyed the climbs, I really enjoyed the peace and quiet being up there, and I think I definitely do feel stronger, but it is difficult to quantify. doing an extended training camp is definitely something I'd recommend. A few weeks of solid work can really help you get a lot fitter and a lot stronger. And doing it somewhere in the mountains really ensures high quality training. And if you're going to do one, you might as well do it at high altitude. Who knows how you're going to react? Maybe you're the kind of person who really gets a big benefit from it. And if all the pro teams are doing it, there must be something in it. Maybe it's really small, but at the end of the day, maybe it's just something extra. And even if you don't get a big altitude benefit out of it, riding up 10 to 15k climbs at the end of every ride definitely will make you stronger.